Hello and welcome. Today we're going to paint a Santa Claus. I'm going to use this long oval stone today, but you can use a shorter round stone. That would work just as well. I'm using a charcoal pencil. It's from General's. And I'm going to sketch on the Santa Claus. This is his face. He's going to have a little oval nose with a mustache underneath it. These are his sideburns, which will pull down into his beard. This is his arm, and his hands will be tucked into his pockets. There will be fur on top of his pocket and on the bottom of his sleeve. And his hands, you'll just see a little bit of them, so it's nothing difficult to paint. This is his other arm, and he's going to have some rosy cheeks there. This charcoal pencil erases really easily. I'm just using a damp Q-tip. And it won't mess up your paint. So I'm kind of filling in all the areas that are going to be white. Most of it's going to be red. So we're going to start filling in with red paint. I'm using a true red from Americana. And all the supplies will be listed in the description when you hit the little down arrow button. This is a number 3 round brush. It's a Princeton brush. They keep their shape pretty well, and they're very inexpensive. I buy my supplies at DecoArt. Now this red is very transparent, so it's going to take more than one coat. I'll paint a nice frame around the back of the stone. And yes, I'm painting over my lines, but generally I know where they're going to be, so it'll be easy for us to put them back on. So his whole jacket's going to be red, but the line down the front is going to be fur, so that will be white. And I don't want to put red underneath the white because the white's going to have a hard time covering the red back up. This paint dries pretty quickly. I didn't even have to use a blow dryer today. It dried so fast, but our humidity's pretty low this week. Paint that back side, make it look nice. If anyone turns it over, then they could say, oh my, this is really a nice stone. I'm putting the paint on a little bit thick, but I do smooth out all of the paint lines. And the hat's already dry, so I'm going to start with that second coat real quick. And I'm really going to speed it up so you don't have to just sit there and watch me paint it all. I don't know if you can hear it raining in the background. We're getting our first decent rain in months, and it's really nice. Okay, so here we get coat number 2 on. It always goes on so much nicer. It's such a beautiful bright red. Here I'm using Rosy Beige-Ceramcoat, a flesh tone. Any flesh tone will do. This one's a little beigeier than I'd like, so I'm going to add just a touch bit of red to make it a little pinker. We're going to paint his face with this and his hands. I'm going to paint the whole face, and then we're going to go back in and start working on separating the nose and giving him rosy cheeks. So basically I'm putting on the light paint, adding a little more red to it. I don't want it too pink because I really want the pink nose and the pink cheeks to show up. So his hands are just kind of a little triangle there. And when we put the fur on, it'll all make sense in just a little bit. A little more red, and I'm going to start working on his nose and his cheeks. Here I made the cheeks kind of small. I do go back and raise them up a little higher. This is just the second coat to cover the skin tone so the rock doesn't show through. Acrylic paints take a lot of coats. That's why if you don't like it the first time, and as you're going along, you can see things you would like to change, and you can do it as you're adding your second and sometimes third coat. Now the right side of his nose is going to have more light on it, so it's going to be really light. By the time I'm finished, I don't have any pink on the right side of the nose at all. I'm using a light brown. It's kind of a reddish tan. This is honey beige, I think. But any light tan color will do fine. It's just to outline the nose a little bit. I will be adding some of that flesh tone color to it. I don't want it to stand out a whole lot, but I do want to separate the nose from the face. The line doesn't have to be perfect. You're going to go back into it to make it thinner and kind of blend it in a little bit. So here I'm using the very light flesh tone color, painting on the right side of the nose right up to that line. I'm going to add some pink back in and do the same thing to the other side and a little bit along the bottom. Needed one more coat of coverage for the face so that it would really stand out and not have any of the stones showing through. So that's what this is all about here. And now I'm going to raise his cheeks up a little higher. He needs big rosy cheeks. Going into the white, we're going to start painting the fur. And I'm going to use that number 3 round, and I'm not going to paint this on, but I'm just going to kind of dot it on. I'm going to put it on very thick so it has a little bit of texture. I want it to stand out. Hi, sweetie. My mourning dove is here. She's right up next to me eating. So anyway, I'm dotting this paint on all the way across the brim of the hat. Now I'm going to put it on top of his sleeve. And on the top of the pocket. And it's a thinner line on top of the pocket. And I do add just a touch bit of curve to that. Okay, let's paint the mustache and the beard. I'm painting the whole thing in. Doing it with the white. Here's his sideburns. And they pull down into the beard. See how it's all coming together now? And because the beard ends right where his white fur on the front of his jacket is, I do curve it a little bit to the left. Mustache is hanging down below his beard, just a little bit on both sides. Now this is his hair. He actually is going to have hair here. And I'm just stroking it on. It's a little messy at the moment down on the bottom, but we'll go back and kind of fine tune that as we go along. Don't want to touch any of that wet paint. I have to make sure it's dry. Boy, it's really beginning to rain. This is wonderful. All right, you want to make sure that the hair is the same length on both sides. You don't want one side to be shorter than the other. He doesn't have a modern haircut, just traditional. That's the fur down the front of his coat. I'm also making it with texture. I'm just touching up any places where the stone might be showing through. Good morning, little dove. How are you? It's good to see you. It's so cool. She comes right up to me. All right, this is ultramarine blue. We're going to be using this for some shading on his jacket with the red. I'm going to use a tiny bit. Look how little. And I'm going to pour some more red. and I'll be blending just a tiny bit of this blue with the red, and I mean a tiny bit. I'm using the 10-0 liner. We're going to be lining along the side of his sleeves and next to his beard and things to create some shadows. So use just a line to define his sleeve. I'm going to kind of round off the shoulder. I'm going to go down the side of his beard and mustache. This is bright red, and I'm blending into the dark blue to kind of pull it in, and that'll help make the shadow and give it some dimension. All right, let's do the other arm now. Round off the shoulder, and I'm going up next to his beard with the blue, and I'm going to blend that in with just plain bright red. You also will need to put a little bit of this darker color on top of the brim of his hat. I didn't do it here, and I don't show it in the video, but later on I'll show you a little bit of video showing you what I did. And because you have some shading down here in the bottom on his jacket, you really need to pull some into the hat. This is white with red, tiny bit of white with the red, so I'm highlighting the right side of the sleeves. And that's what we have so far. He's already looking good. Put some eyes on there and a little ball on his hat, and he'd be ready to go. Tiny bit of very light gray. You could also use blue mixed with white to do this. We're putting a few lines here and there to give some curve and dimension to his mustache and beard. I am outlining the bottom of the beard. He needs a little shadow under there. I go back in between those gray lines with that white because I want some of his beard to be very bright white. And the thicker the paint there is, it will be a little textured. Adding a little bit more gray underneath, very light gray, to create that shadow underneath his mustache. And I'm pulling in some curvy strokes into his beard to show direction. And now I'm going back in with white in between those lines to brighten it up and kind of blend into the gray. I don't want the gray lines to be thick, so I thin them out here as I go along. Back to the number 2 paintbrush, and I'm just brightening up the white on his sideburns and his hair. It needed a second coat. .10 liner. Going to do some more fine lines, a little bit of the gray, and I'm going to separate his sideburns from his hair. Just a thin gray line. And I'm going to start adding a few small strokes into his sideburns. Very light gray. It's even hard for you to see it here, but it'll show up. You'll see. Going back in between those lines with the bright white paint. I want his hair to be crisp and clean. I'm going to shade underneath the brim all the way across with the light gray. That'll kind of separate his brim from his hair. I'm going to do the other side the same way. Sorry, when I hold my rock I move it, but I just like to hold the rocks in my hand. That way I don't miss anything. Now I'm going back in with white, blend it back up, taking a look at it, seeing what changes I want to make. Here's that 10-0 liner. We're going to define the points of his hair here. I just kind of want him to be clean cut, little curves. I like that kind of, what's the word, format. I like that kind of style when I'm doing a whimsical creature. So there's his hair. I'm putting the light gray lines in just to give him separation for his little curls. The other side is the same way. There's no right or wrong here. I'll be adding a little bit of gray lines to it. And going in between that with bright white, making those gray lines very thin. And that's pretty much it for all the hair. I will keep going back from time to time, adding more bright white as these layers dry. That was wobbly. So there's how he's looking. Okay, I'm going to use that ultramarine blue again. Mix it with some more bright red. We're going to do a little bit more shading. I'm going to shade all on the left side of the ball, and how the little hair, the little hat is flipping down. I'm going to get that shaded in just to give it some separation. Now I'm using a little bit of white with red to get a highlight on top of that little hat that's flipping down. I put the white on, and then I go back in with the bright red to blend. I'm going to add some more of the dark blue with the red. Shade the inside of the coat next to his arms. Makes it look more realistic. Let's go down the side of the fur. It's really a little tiny bit of blue. It makes a big difference though when you're shading. This is bright red, blending it back in. And that red won't cover that blue back up completely, so the shading is going to look just really smooth when you're done. I want to add a little bit more pink to the left side of his hands. Make them look like they're curving a little bit, and the light's hitting them from the right. And here, you can't see it, but I put a little highlight on his cheeks and his nose, so here's a close-up of what I did. Again, this is another bright white, giving it streaks. The paint's going on pretty thick, so there will be some dimension. And let's add some of those little curls to the edge of his beard, just like we did to his hair, so that it looks like it fits in with the rest of the project. Yeah, that looks pretty good. A little bit of blue and white to separate the top of his jacket fur from his beard. It's just a little shadow. Now we're going to do his eyes, and this is pure black. You can use any kind of pure black. I'm penciling them back in, and I'm using my number 2 round, and I'm just going to fill in that whole space. Also gives me an opportunity to get the eyes the same size and the same shape. They don't have to be perfect, but you want them to be as close as possible. A little curve on the bottom of the eyes will give him some sparkle. This is a metallic pearl white paint, and I'm going back to that number 3 round, and I'm going to dab this paint on top of all of the fur. It's kind of a silvery highlight, makes it stand out. You can't see it at all right here, but later on as it dries you'll be able to see the difference. You can also just use glitter if you want to. You can leave it white. It looks good no matter what. I just always like a little bit of sparkle in my paintings that I do. All of the fur is getting covered with a layer of this. Can you see it kind of shining there? Now the black has dried on the eyes, so I'm going to go ahead and fill in the inside of that with white paint, right up to the edge of the black. I'm using that 10-0 liner. And do both eyes. Just fill it in. It looks a little spooky here. Alright, now this is crisp blue. It's such a gorgeous blue, and he's going to have some happy eyes. Now we're painting the circle. I'm putting this one right in the center because I want him to be looking at us. It's coming all together. Alright, let's put a pupil on. So this is another circle on top of the blue. I do make sure that the top of the circle does touch the black circle at the top of his eye, but I don't bring it all the way down to the bottom. Touching up my black here, making them go around, and then I'm going to go up against that with this flesh tone color just to smooth it out. These are the fun details when you're painting that just make a big difference. Nice and straight. And there we have it. It's time to add a little sparkle. So these are his little smile lines, and then I'm going to add a few eyelashes. Smile lines, a small line, a bigger line right at the corner, and then the eyelashes go up from there. Put a highlight in the top of his eyes. Give him a little mouth. Again, I'm going to add another little layer of bright white. Clean things up. Need some buttons. I'm using that number 2 round, and I'm just dipping it in the paint and dotting his